Hello, everyone, and welcome to What's Going On. I am your hostess for this segment. My name is Chris Natha DeRozier, and I am super excited because we are sitting down with an amazing woman. And I hope that you guys are ready for an incredible conversation. Tonight, we have Dr. Heather Moore Roberson, who's going to be sharing some really amazing wisdom with us this evening. So I am excited, and I hope that you are too. Just highlight some of her incredible accomplishments, and this is just a little bit because she's pretty amazing. She was named City and State Pennsylvania's 2024 list of Black Trailblazers, and she's also contributed to several books on race and civic engagement as well. And so we're going to be hearing all things diversity and inclusion, as well as the just beauty of Black lives. And so we're going to have a really amazing conversation. So I am excited. If you could please help me welcome um, our amazing guest this evening, Dr. Heather. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Happy to be here, Chris Natha. Thanks for having me. Shout out to everybody who's on the live with us today. It's going to be a great conversation. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Yes, I am too. So again, we're excited that you're here. And if you could just talk to us about you being a dean of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what that actually means, because I know we hear the term diversity so much, and if you could just help enlighten some of our viewers who aren't really clear about what that role entails.
Yeah. So the word diversity, simply defined, is appreciating the range of differences that different individuals bring into a particular environment. And so you mentioned that I am a dean of diversity, equity, and inclusion at a college. So in some spaces, folks would call me a senior diversity officer or a chief diversity officer. And many of these positions started up not just at colleges and universities, but even at larger organizations, Fortune 500 companies, in light of some of the key moments that happened during the start of COVID, with the murder of George Floyd and other folks. And so we saw these major companies, these colleges and universities, starting to create more positions where diversity workers or diversity officers were hired to make certain that organizations were being mindful of and paying attention to the range of differences that individuals bring into an environment, which is in essence diversity, but also making certain that they were being fair, and prioritizing equity, which is about fairness and making certain that people have access to the resources that they need in order to be able to thrive, not survive in an environment. So that's why diversity and equity go hand in hand. And then when you talk about inclusion, which is the I in DEI, inclusion talks about creating environments where people can utilize their skill sets, what makes them unique, key aspects of their identity in order to enhance a particular environment. So when folks say that they are diversity workers or they do diversity, equity, and inclusion work, typically that's what they mean.
Mm, awesome. I've noticed there's been a bit of a shift taking place in the space of diversity.
Yeah.
Um, what would you say makes a great leader in this space?
That's a good question. Initially, I didn't know where you were going to go with that question because I was like, oh, yeah, there's a lot of shifts happening with diversity workers and a lot of conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion now. What does it take to be a good leader in this field? There's a lot of things. But what stands out to me is a leader in this field is someone who can listen to other people's experiences, can make space for people to fully be themselves. A good leader in this field is a strong listener. someone who can analyze a organization or institution's culture and see what's missing, someone who is savvy and strategic. Because sometimes folks who are diversity workers, particularly at companies where diversity may be lacking at the moment, they have to be folks who can analyze that space and say, here are areas that need to be improved upon. But that work has to be strategic. That work has to be done in such a way where it does not ostracize certain folks, or it doesn't make people want to abandon diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives outright. And so those are some things that I would say defines a good sort of diversity worker in this current moment. Somebody who's strategic, savvy, good listener, and someone who can make space for a variety of different people in multiple different ways in a particular organization.
Awesome. In terms of diversity, community on campus, in terms of Greek, right? The Greek life, and even specifically Black Greek organizations, how important would you say is it for that to have a presence on campus? Is it important? Is it not? And if it is, why would you say it is?
I do think it's important. But I also think that there's work that needs to be done in order to make space for Greek letter organizations to be able to thrive, right? That component of thinking about equity and thinking about inclusion. So some of the research that I've published on recently talked about this experience that I had at my current institution, where I helped to reactivate a chapter of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated on my campus, which is a predominantly white institution. My institution is over 200 years old. And when I arrived, there were no Divine Nine or historically Black Greek letter organizations on my campus. And so we had heard rumblings about the fact that there used to be this chapter of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated at my current institution. And I thought, let's try and see if there are students who are interested in it so we can revive it, because it was important to think about adding Black Greek life in this predominantly white space, because our student body was changing. Our demographics were changing. So when I first got here almost a decade ago, there were less students of color than there are now. And so it's important to have different opportunities, particularly related to Greek life, that are available for students of color specifically, for all students, but especially for students of color. We know that historically Black Greek letter organizations were created because Black and brown folks back in the day couldn't get into the historically white sororities and fraternities. And so it's really important to think about ways that Black Greek letter organizations can be introduced at predominantly white institutions in ways that are constructive and productive for all folks involved. But they cannot be a placeholder for fixing all things related to race and racism on college and university campuses. There's got to be other work that's happening too. So I think it is important for Black Greek letter organizations to, be at colleges and universities and at predominantly white institutions, but it's got to be done in a way that is meaningful and productive for all involved.
I love that. And I think it's so important with the diversity space, just making sure that there's a voice for everyone.
Sure. Absolutely. Agreed. Absolutely agree.
Excuse me. Yeah, so there's a voice for everyone. So thank you for sharing that. And if we could just pivot just a bit. I know that Mother's Day is something that is coming up. And I wonder if you could just share with us what are some inspirational women in your life that has made a difference on you, has made an influence on you to help you become the woman that you are today?
Yeah, great question. There's so many women. You mentioned Mother's Day. I might have an opportunity to talk about my mother later. She's one of the first folks that come to mind, but there's two others. So the first is my paternal grandmother, my father's mother, my grandma Lottie, who, God rest her soul. When I wasn't with my parents, I was with my grandma Lottie and my uncle Squeaky. And so my grandmother was from rural Mississippi, moved up to Buffalo following her older brother, and moved up there with this guy and ended up having 10 kids. It was my grandfather. And what my grandma Lottie taught me was about the importance of faith, family, and community. She was always hosting Bible studies at the house, and people were coming over talking about the goodness of the Lord. She was always cooking for somebody something, even though her refrigerator was empty. That's something that I didn't necessarily think about until it left my lips just now. But like, her refrigerator was always empty, but she always had food on the table. She was always able to, really make a dollar out of 15 cents and find ways to make something happen, even if it didn't look like it was gonna happen. And she never abandoned the east side of Buffalo, which is where I'm from, which is a predominantly Black working class community. She lived there until she transitioned, and she made a home there, even when folks were encouraging her to leave. She always found a way to create home wherever she was at, and I admired that about her. So that's the first person, my grandma Lottie. The second person is my academic godmother, Crystal Austin Seymour, Buffalo native. Also, we affectionately called her Mama Crystal. She transitioned a year before COVID, 2019, and I was amongst the group of former students of hers who were there when she was close to officially transitioning. So what is memorable to me about Mama Crystal is that she didn't have children of her own, but she adopted all of her students, not all of them, some of us. And so even though she was not given the opportunity to be a mother in the biological sense, she mothered so many of us. Mothered us through relationships, mothered us through school, mothered us when we needed to be fed, gave us tough love. And the biggest thing that I take away from Mama Crystal, which I value so much, is she taught me how to make excellence a part of my DNA. She had this quote that when we first met her, she would tell us to memorize and commit to memory. And if I had a tattoo, this was what would be tattooed on me. Mediocrity is unacceptable. So she was telling this to a bunch of Black and brown low income kids in the city of Buffalo who were identified as gifted or smart. And she said, y'all might be smart, but, mediocrity is unacceptable. You need to commit to excellence. And so she was a safe space for me and some of my colleagues to be able to thrive and fail in a community with folks that look just like me. So I'm grateful to those two and many of the other folks as well.
That is so awesome. Thank you for just giving us just a peek into some
Mhm.
of the ladies who have been such a blessing to you, your grandmother, your godmother, and even your mom. How does that, how when you take all of that, I know
Yeah.
it's, but how do you take all of that and then now you take it and you add your special expertise to it, your own experience
Yeah.
to it, and
Yeah.
then now you mother your own children, specifically Black children, right?
Right. Yes.
How do you do that? Are there some lessons that you say, I'm going to take this and apply it here? This was a blessing to me, therefore I'm going to also pass this down to my children as well.
Yeah. So very similarly to Mama Crystal, I've done a lot of, there's scholarship that talks about other mothering. I've been other mothering um, former students of mine for over a decade. So even before I was actually, blessed with the opportunity to be a mother, I've been doing this for a while. So I got to see firsthand what mothering could look like from folks like Mama Crystal, who took a lot of young people under her wing and she mothered them in a variety of different ways. But it's interesting. One of the things that stands out to me is the fact that I'm mothering Black boys. So I didn't plan this, of course, to be a boy mom. But mothering Black boys is a unique relationship because I don't identify as male. I don't identify as a young boy. And so sometimes it's hard for me as a mother to feel like I'm equipping them with the knowledge and the insights that's going to um, help them. So I'm grateful to my husband to be able to, pick up in ways that I can't. But what I will say is that often when people ask me, I get this question often, probably daily. They'll say, how are your kids doing? And I'll say alive, and they immediately laugh. And I've never really shared this publicly, but it's intentional why I say alive, because I think my job as a mother, a Black mother of Black boys, is to find a way to make certain that they stay alive. And so people say that, they laugh and jest when I say they're alive, and that's what I care about. But in actuality, I think my job is to keep them alive and to give them strategies at their respective ages, so that they can figure out how they can stay alive in a world that's trying to um, silence them, in a world that is trying to give them so many obstacles that they just give up. So, a lot of the work that I'm doing with my own children and children that I have, that I'm a part of their village, I'm really trying to figure out strategies and skills on how to keep them alive.
Yeah. That's so beautiful and heartbreaking at the same
Sad.
time,
Sad.
but it's a reality. It's a reality. And so, with that being said about raising children, specifically Black boys, there's a legacy that every Black boy carries of motherhood. And how is that addressed in your books?
Yeah. So, some of the work that I've done, a lot of it has really been based upon pop culture. So, fictional representations of Black boys in academic and non-academic spaces, but educational spaces broadly. And so, I'm someone who believes and have argued for a while that the relationships that Black boys have with their mothers is a critical part of their development. And so, on the one hand, it can, hinder their progress, or it could set them up for success, or somewhere in between. So I'm thinking about particular images or relationships between Black mothers and Black sons in my research. And so there's a couple of folks that I'll point to. So for folks on the live today who are pop culture aficionados like me, this may resonate with you. So I'll start with one that's typically most familiar from a different world. I think about the relationship between like Dwayne Wayne and not Patti LaBelle, but his mother, who was played by Patti LaBelle. And I think about the ways that she nurtured his love of academics, love of mathematics, supported him, had little pet names for him, called him her chipmunk, and he was able to take interest in computers and all things academic and education. And we know how he ended up. He ended up going on to college and teaching in college, and had a quote unquote stereotypical successful life. So I think that part of that success, what was central to that success, is being able to go home and have a mother who is encouraging him to consider academic opportunities that may propel him forward in the future. On the flip side, I think about another television series that is a bit more contemporary, that a lot of people talk about. It's widely recognized as one of the greatest television series ever, The Wire, which was on HBO in the early 2000s. I think about my favorite season, season 4. If you watch The Wire season 4, you know what mother-son relationship I'm going to. I'm going to Delonda Bryce and Naaman Bryce. And that relationship is one of the more heartbreaking ones, where Delonda Bryce is in a relationship with her son Naaman's father, who is currently incarcerated as a so-called drug dealer, and she wants her son to follow in his father's footsteps. and he doesn't want to. He wants to go to school and he wants to learn and he wants to do something other than selling drugs in his neighborhood. And so this causes a rift within their relationship. And Naaman, the son, ends up having this difficulty being able to continue a relationship with his mother and ends up unofficially being adopted by somebody else. So in some, it's really important that mothers and sons have relationships, but relationships that can be really beneficial for the development of young African American boys at various stages of their lives, from birth to death, even, right? Because the mothering doesn't stop when you turn 18.
That's right. That's right. So how do you, as an educator, how do you address that in your curriculum or within your students, just that pressure that mothers have, right, to be stronger than everyone,
Yeah.
to kind of be everyone's support, and just navigate this journey of motherhood, and which can be very complicated.
Yeah. Aside from being a mother, I'm also a Black woman. So being a Black woman, there are certain kinds of pressures that we face as Black women, both at work and outside of work. In my opinion, Black women are not given the luxury of making mistakes. We are not given the opportunity to be mediocre. We have to be perfect. We're not
Yeah.
allowed to be anything less than perfect. And I've talked a little bit earlier in our conversation today about research, but a large part of my identity is a teacher. So I've been teaching at the college level for the past 16 years. And so if I can answer this question this way, the pressures that I feel as a Black woman shows up in the classroom too. I think it really came to head probably about 8 years ago, when I was experiencing this pressure to be perfect, never make a mistake, always come off as polished and put together with my students. And then in February of 2016, the night before one of my classes, I get a call from one of my cousins, one of my favorite cousins. And she said, and I quote, your favorite cousin Ariel was just killed by the police last night, end quote. And it rocked me because I was already having a rough time. It was February in the semester. I was struggling to keep it all together. I was a new member of the faculty. I was still within my first year here, actually. Mm-hmm. And this person who was killed, my cousin Ariel Clark, who was killed in Ohio, my favorite cousin, my guy. Like, this was not just some distant relative that I saw at family reunions every 5 years. This was my dude. And so hearing that he was murdered while incarcerated, but also thinking about how it connected to my research and how it connected to the justice work and community work that I've done, it just added a different dimension to it. And so I remember going into class that next day and the polish wore off. The polish was gone. There was no polish. There was no perfection. There was no pressure. It was, I am broken and I don't, and I can't hide it from y'all. Mm-hmm. And so I remember telling students, my cousin was murdered last night and I don't know what we're going to do today. So we might just have to come to class and watch a movie. We might just have to sit here in silence. I might let y'all go, but I just can't even process words right now. And so while I still certainly feel the pressure, being a faculty member and now as an administrator, being a senior diversity officer at a college, I push my students, I push people on my team to see themselves as full human beings who are authentically who they are. I don't force people to fit into boxes or molds in order to work with me. I just want people to show up however they can show up and be able to be their best selves and know that moments are going to happen that are going to challenge us. And I try to make space to create community for folks to be able to be with folks. So when those challenges and obstacles do show up, that they have a community of people that they can lean on.
That's so amazing, because it's definitely one of the definitions of a great leader, just having a safe space for everyone to be their full selves.
Yeah.
Um, and I know it may have been some time ago, but I do want to offer my condolences
You're done.
for your cousin, about your cousin. That's a loss is a loss, and that's really challenging and hard.
Thank you.
And you have that firsthand experience, like you said, about the work that you do, the research that you've done, and you can speak to your students. Like, I understand. I really do get it.
Right.
I'm a Black woman. I've experienced loss, challenges, pressure, that feeling of wanting to not make a mistake
Yeah.
because I'll be judged for being fully human. And so
Yeah.
those pressures are real. So having this diversity space and a woman such as yourself who really gets it, I think it's important work. And I just want to thank you for the incredible work that you're doing.
Thank you. And I think one thing that came up for me in that moment too, in the loss of my cousin, is right around that time. So this is 2016. This is 3 years after the start of Black Lives Matter too, right? And so, I'm in marches and I'm telling people that they need to organize, and I'm part of candlelight vigils, and I'm doing all of these things, and then Lives Matter lands on your doorstep.
Mm-hmm.
And not officially, but lands on your doorstep in the sense of, you now know the person who is the hashtag. Like, what happens when your relative becomes the hashtag? It actually shows up for me every time I watch the 13th documentary. So, Chris Natha, I don't know if you've seen 13th by Ava DuVernay. My cousin Ariel Clark's name is listed in that documentary at the end of it. So I can't watch the documentary. I show it in class, I leave, because I can't watch it, because every time I see it, it gets brought up again for me. And so it's one thing to teach about Black Lives Matter and the importance of social justice and social movements. It's another thing when that relative of yours is the hashtag, when that relative of yours is listed in a documentary that everybody cites now. And I appreciate, the attention paid to him, and that his name is being honored and said, in that space. But it's hard when you're no longer talking about someone who you don't know. It's like, no. Now I know this person. And so how do you handle that as a human being, not just as a professional, not just as somebody who does DEI work? It's like, how do you handle this now?
Because it's personal.
It's personal. Exactly. It's personal. Exactly.
Well, the work that you do is definitely necessary. And so we're thankful that you do it. You're committed and you're authentic. And if you could just leave us with some words of wisdom for everyone watching, just to keep in mind that whether they are in college or not, in the corporate space or not, but what are some just words you could leave us with to help us just to stay mindful of this space and just the importance of it?
Yeah. So something I was telling someone else a couple of days ago, it might have even been yesterday. I'm in a season in my life, and I'm encouraging folks around me to also function and operate in this season if you feel called to. I'm in a season of my life where I only go places where people make room for me and for my gifts. If you can't make room for how I'm coming or what I'm doing or my gifts or the uniqueness and all of the greatness that is me, I don't need to be there. And so I guess my words of wisdom would be, go into spaces where people are going to make room for you specifically. You're not going to check a box for them. You are not going to be on a conveyor belt that they're picking up something that looks similar, like the uniqueness of you. And so that's my sort of piece of wisdom, that you go where you are celebrated as opposed to where you're appreciated. So especially as Black women coming up on, Mother's Day and just exiting Women's History Month and Black History Month, like, Black women deserve to be celebrated every day. And if you are in a space, either professionally or personally, where you are not celebrated, run, because you deserve better.
Absolutely. That's a word. I hope everybody heard that.
Yeah.
Take heed. We should be celebrated.
Absolutely.
And if not, run.
Run.
Thank you so much, Dr. Heather. If you could just tell us, how can we stay connected with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have I'm on Instagram and Twitter. I do a lot of retweeting on Twitter, to be honest, because there's just so much goodness out there. But they're the same handle. So at the 716 scholar, at THE716 scholar on Instagram and on Twitter. So that's definitely a way to stay connected with me. And we can, talk all things related to DEI, identity, race, or just a good kiki, because we all need that too.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you again for taking some time sitting down with us,
Of course.
and sharing such a wealth of wisdom with us this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And you are always welcome back because we had such a great time. And everybody who's watching, thank you so much for just tuning in. Stay connected with us here on Swag Her, where we have amazing segments such as this and incredible guests, just like Dr. Heather Moore Roberson. So we will see you guys soon. And until then, be well. Take
Thank you.
care.
Bye.